In the endless dark of space, where every flickering star seemed either a silent witness or a hidden conspirator, Titan's Nexus station hovered like a stubborn fortress against the cosmic night. The year was 3047, and mankind had spread across the solar system with vigor and ambition, building cities and domed craters on the moon, forging factories on Mars, and, in the case of Titan, constructing a monumental habitat that endured beneath Saturn's majestic rings. Titans, they called themselves, those who dared brave the station's frigid corridors, making a living among black market traders, data smugglers, and renegade explorers. Among them walked a man named Ethan "Lucky" Hayes, though, to be perfectly honest, his luck often proved questionable. His short, tousled hair was a hue of dusty gold that matched the tarnished color of the station's overhead lights, and his eyes held the faint spark of mischief, the sort of quicksilver energy that flickered between a gambler's confidence and a jester's irreverence. For the most part, he was simply another rogue, a drifting soul living job to job, rarely trusted, but often needed. On this particular night, Ethan crouched in a dimly lit corridor that reeked of old grease and stale oxygen, waiting for the last shift of security droids to pass. He had in his satchel a highly sensitive data crystal, gleaned from corporate servers he had no business touching. Yet, as he liked to tell his occasional allies, if it's worth stealing, that's usually what I'm here for. The job had been pitched as straightforward: break into Nova Corp's local offices, snatch a specialized data crystal, and slip away quietly. But success had never come easily to Ethan, for he belonged to that rare breed whose fortunes oscillated like the rings of Saturn, enchanting at a distance, perhaps, but chaotic up close. With measured breaths, Ethan peered around the corner. Two security droids, tall as men but bulkier, lurked near a half-closed blast door. They glinted silver beneath the overhead flicker of ancient lighting panels, scanning everything within range with their unwavering, mechanical eyes. Titan's Nexus station was old, built and rebuilt across centuries, so it carried more than a few hidden alcoves, desperate corners where a cunning thief might crouch. Ethan forced a grin as the droid's steps echoed on the metal deck plates. He pressed a small device against the panel behind him. It emitted a brief magnetic pulse that caused the overhead lights to spark and dim further. The droids responded with a momentary flurry of confusion, turning in unison to investigate. Seizing the moment, Ethan sprang from the shadows, boots silent yet swift, sliding past their line of sight as a dancer might flit across a stage. He let out a slow exhale when he reached the next corridor without any alarms blaring, the data crystal safely in his bag. So far, so good. Perhaps fortune smiled upon him for once, he thought, though that fleeting notion dissolved the instant he heard the dreaded clank of an automated turret unfolding from the ceiling. Titan's authorities had upgraded security. Nova Corp likely had a personal interest in making sure no one got out with their precious data. Ethan spun around and dove behind a crate as a sharp hiss of compressed air preceded a bright flash of laser fire. The beam seared the metal floor beside him, leaving a scorched trail of smoke and sizzling sparks. Heart pounding, he rummaged in his coat pocket until he found a small, palm-sized disruptor. He pressed the button, sending an electromagnetic burst into the turret's sensors. Instantly, the gun ceased its deadly glow, rotating aimlessly before falling limp. Yet his relief was short-lived. Beyond that corridor's threshold stood three more droids, each brandishing shock staffs that crackled with a menacing hum. Ethan eyed his own meager sidearm. He was a decent shot, sure, but these droids were new, outfitted with the latest riot control technology. Relying on a single pistol would be foolish. Swallowing a rising tide of panic, he flipped behind another barrier, only to be cornered by two more mechanical sentinels that emerged from a side door. At that critical moment, a siren began to wail, harsh and jarring, echoing throughout the labyrinth of corridors. Ethan knew, in that instant, that stealth was no longer an option. He had mere seconds before the entire security network locked down, and the closest exit might as well have been across the galaxy. He took a deep breath. "All right, Lucky Hayes," he murmured to himself, "time to live up to your nickname." He made a break for it, dashing down the hallway with the data crystal clutched tight to his chest. A flurry of laser bolts lit the corridor behind him, scorching the walls and sending spatters of molten metal flying. His mind buzzed with adrenaline, urging his feet ever faster, but eventually, he found his path blocked by a reinforced barrier. It slammed shut with a metallic clang. He was trapped. The droids cornered him swiftly, forming an impassable line of shining metal limbs and red-lit optical sensors. They advanced in perfect unity, mechanical feet thudding with each step, shock staffs aimed at his head, chest, and legs. Ethan knew he was finished. The best he could hope for was to keep his hide intact long enough to strike a deal. After all, Nova Corp might want the data crystal back, and Ethan, a self-styled gambler, always tried to keep a spare card up his sleeve. "Drop your weapon," a monotone voice commanded, each syllable echoing in the steel corridor. Ethan, with a rueful grin, obeyed. He tossed his sidearm to the floor. The droid surged forward, pressing the electrified staff tips to his body. Pain jolted through him, and the darkness rushed in. Ethan woke in what he first took for a dream but soon recognized as the station's detention sector, an intimidating place lit by cold, artificial light that never seemed to flicker. His wrists were shackled with electromagnetic cuffs. The cramped cell was sealed behind a transparent barrier, so thick he couldn't even hear the hum of the outside corridor. He tested the cuffs. They refused to budge, delivering a warning jolt of electricity that made him wince. With a low hiss of frustration, he settled back against the cell's metal bench, letting his mind spin. That data crystal was inside the bag he'd carried, and it was likely confiscated by now. "Well," he muttered, "I've gotten out of worse scrapes, right?" No comforting voice answered him, only the cold static of the detention center's silent walls. Yet, after what felt like hours, the faintest of voices drifted toward him, muffled by the barrier. He jerked upright. Someone was outside his cell, speaking with the warden. The voice sounded low, assured, perhaps female. Then, as swiftly as it began, the conversation ended, and the cell door slid open, the barrier vanishing in a gentle shimmer of energy. In walked a woman with raven-black hair, tall and draped in an elegant robe that glimmered with gold-threaded patterns reminiscent of ancient runes. She had a refined face, sharp cheekbones, and eyes that glowed with an uncanny, almost hypnotic brilliance. Her posture and attire suggested wealth and influence, which made her presence in a grim detention block all the more surreal. "They call you Ethan Hayes, do they not?" she said softly, her voice carrying the cultured accent of the intersolar elites. She waved a slender hand, and to Ethan's amazement, the cuffs around his wrist snapped open as if undone by an unseen force. "But I hear others call you lucky. Pray tell, do you feel lucky, locked here in Titan's bowels?" He rubbed his sore wrists, blinking. "I've felt better," he said, his usual flippant humor subdued by confusion and awe. "But I guess I'm alive, so that's something." She placed a hand on her hip, the shimmering fabric of her robe catching the harsh light. "Yes, well, your fortune may soon change. My name is Madame Vira. I have certain influences across this station, and I have arranged for your release. Your crimes, petty as they are, can be overlooked, should you choose to assist me in a matter of some urgency." Ethan stood. Freedom was the sweetest word in the galaxy, and to have it offered so unexpectedly raised his suspicions. "I suppose you've got a job for me," he guessed. "Something involving that data crystal I tried to steal from Nova Corp. Maybe?" A slight smile tugged at her lips. "Indeed. The crystal is more valuable than you can imagine. You likely believe it's but a blueprint or a ledger, but in truth, it contains encrypted logs from Nova Corp's flagship, the Hyperion. These logs reveal a dark secret. Nova Corp is holding a telepathic alien in captivity, something so rare as to be nearly mythical. Her name is Sera, though, strictly speaking, that is only how her name translates into our language." Ethan felt a prickle of surprise. Telepaths were creatures of legend, impossible to train, impossible to contain. Most have been rumored extinct for centuries, driven out or destroyed during a savage age when humankind feared anything that threatened its dominion. So Nova Corp is imprisoning her? Using her for what? Madame Vira's eyes darkened, as though she carried a great sorrow. For power, obviously. Companies like Nova Corp are ever hungry for advantage. The presence of a genuine telepath could tip the scales in countless negotiations or unravel the secrets of entire governments. She paused, measuring Ethan's expression. "You are the first to successfully obtain proof of this. If we can confirm the data, we might be able to free Sera. Without your help, the crystal's secrets remain half-buried under layers of encryption." She handed him a small device, part data key, part decryption module. "I suspect you didn't steal the entire code, only part of it. Nova Corp often stores vital data across multiple nodes to prevent theft. But there is more to retrieve from the Hyperion itself. My task is twofold. Infiltrate that dreadnought, locate Sera, and release her from her restraints. Then, find the rest of the data to expose Nova Corporation. Help me, and your slate here on Titan will be wiped clean." Ethan chuckled darkly, rubbing his neck. "That's quite the tall order. Nova Corp's security squads and advanced warships are nothing to sneeze at. Vira nodded. True enough. Which is why we need someone with your particular skills. I suspect you've managed to remain alive despite your recklessness because of more than mere luck. You're resourceful. A gambler whose wits might prevail where brute force fails. Sera is bound by chains of energy that tighten with her fear, or so the intel suggests. Perhaps a cunning approach can succeed where direct confrontation would result in her permanent captivity. Ethan gave a short nod, swallowing the last of his misgivings. The notion of a telepathic alien enslaved by corporate greed stuck in his craw. He'd done plenty of questionable things in his time, but this felt bigger. If freeing Sera helped disrupt Nova Corp and save lives in the process, maybe it was worth the risk. Besides, he told himself, he had a healthy sense of self-preservation, but also a nagging conscience. A good gambler knew when to fold and when to go all in. All right, he said with a forced smile, count me in. Let's see how I can break into the Hyperion without getting atomized. Madame Vira's influence extended beyond Titan, affording Ethan passage on a sleek courier ship outward bound toward the Hyperion's patrol route near Jupiter's orbit. During the short journey, he studied the dreadnought schematics. It was said to be the size of a small city, bristling with advanced weaponry, manned by a legion of loyal corporate soldiers, and run by an AI rumored to be more cunning than many human generals. Your infiltration will rely on a straightforward ruse, Vira explained in the ship's cramped lounge, sipping from a delicate crystal goblet. Nova Corp routinely contracts outside technicians to maintain the dreadnought's lesser systems, water recycling, life support calibration, that sort of thing. I have arranged false credentials for you. She slid a holocard across the table. Keep your head down, avoid suspicion, and locate Sera. Ethan raised an eyebrow. And once I find her, she offered a cryptic smile. Let your wits guide you. Remember, the energy chains respond to her emotional state. If she grows fearful, the shackles will tighten, likely harming her. You must find a way to calm her, to make her laugh even, if that's possible. Laughter is a potent remedy for fear, is it not? Ethan couldn't help but grin at the thought, freeing a powerful telepath with humor. It appealed to his sense of the absurd, a kind of cosmic punchline that soared in the face of all reason. I'll see what I can do, he said softly. They parted ways once the courier reached a quiet outpost near Jupiter. There, waiting in a bustling docking bay, was a Nova Corp shuttle that ferried technicians back and forth to the Hyperion. Ethan joined them, merging into a line of bored workers carrying toolkits and wearing nondescript uniforms. The flight to the dreadnought took little more than an hour, yet every minute felt like a coiled spring beneath Ethan's ribs. He studied the other technicians with peripheral glances, looking for any sign they suspected him. But no one gave him more than a second's notice. Everyone looked tired, worn down by the corporate grind. The Hyperion came into view through the shuttle's viewport, a metallic leviathan shining in the reflected glow of the Jovian storms. Its hull appeared seamless and unbreakable, covered in plates of silver-gray alloy. He felt a twinge of awe. Even though he'd seen his share of large ships, the Hyperion radiated an almost mythic power. Once docked, Ethan kept his head bowed and shuffled behind a handful of other newcomers. They were briefly scanned by guard drones, but, thanks to Madame Vira's forged credentials, he passed the identity check. He exhaled in relief as the corridor doors slid open to reveal an interior that was both elegant and utilitarian. Wide hallways lined with metallic panels, overhead lights set in symmetrical rows, and the faint hum of an advanced life support system thrumming behind every wall. He quickly made his way to the lower decks, where the less glamorous systems resided, and from there, he accessed a maintenance console. The data crystal from Titan was hidden deep within his toolkit. When no one was watching, he slid it into the console's port, decrypting further files with the device Vira had provided. It didn't take long for the system to spit out updated coordinates. Sera was being held in a specialized containment unit near the center of the ship, deep within the vessel's research sector. He whistled under his breath. That sector was heavily guarded, restricted to the top echelons of Nova Corp scientists and security. Gaining entry would be no small feat yet. If he was to free Sera and survive, he had little choice. Late that evening, when the corridors were quiet except for the distant buzz of overhead lights, Ethan made his move. He'd spent the day quietly rerouting sensor arrays and forging access codes, carefully evading the watchful eyes of the Dreadnought's security AI. Now, with a stolen pass, he navigated a labyrinth of identical corridors. His pulse thudded in his ears each time a security guard or patrolling droid stepped past, but he managed to slip by unnoticed. At last, he arrived before a blast door etched with a single emblem, the winged logo of Nova Corp's R&D division. Beyond that door lay the alien captive, as well as any number of hidden dangers. The passkey he'd crafted flickered uncertainly in the reader, but, with a hiss, the door slid open. The corridor beyond glowed in an eerie twilight, lit by panels that pulsed with a pale blue hue. Cabinets and sealed glass cases lined the walls, holding an assortment of bizarre devices. Some glistened with energy, others bristled with needles, as though designed for experimentation on living subjects. Ethan felt a stab of revulsion. The cruelty of it made him more determined to succeed. He proceeded until he reached another sealed barrier, a transparent field of shimmering light. Beyond it, he saw a chamber with reinforced walls, evidently designed to contain powers that defied logic. In the center of the chamber, bound by glowing bands of violet energy, knelt a lithe figure. Its skin shone with a slight opalescence, like mother-of-pearl catching the reflection of starlight. Its features were delicate and graceful, humanoid, yet undeniably alien. Long, wispy hair seemed to float about its head, as if caught in zero-G, though the artificial gravity here felt normal enough. Ethan's heart hammered in his chest. So this was Sera. Her eyes were half-closed, a dull, weary expression etched on her face. Thin lines of the glowing violet chain wrapped around her wrists, ankles, and torso. She appeared exhausted, perhaps from fighting the relentless energy that tightened with fear. Summoning a breath, Ethan stepped forward, searching for a control panel. He spotted one near the wall, but it was locked behind a glass case. Typical. The glass, though, was not the standard bulletproof type. That gave him an idea. Carefully, he removed a small sonic pick from his belt and applied it to the casing's edge. With a soft hum, the device weakened the glass at a molecular level, allowing him to crack it with the hilt of his pistol. He reached inside, flipping a series of switches, deactivating the shimmering barrier between him and the captive alien. Once it faded, he slid into the chamber. Sera lifted her head, eyes widening slightly. Her lips moved, though she said nothing Ethan could comprehend. Yet he felt something. A stirring presence in his mind, gentle, questioning, as though she were testing him. "Easy," he whispered, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm here to help." She seemed confused, wariness flickering across her iridescent features. The glowing chains tightened a fraction, drawing a pained gasp from her. Ethan cursed under his breath. If she grew too fearful, the shackles would tighten further and might do permanent damage. He needed to calm her, and quickly. But how did one comfort a telepathic alien he'd never met before? She looked upon him with eyes that shimmered blue-green, and he felt the gentle probe intensify, as if she attempted to read his thoughts. Then, quite suddenly, she recoiled, surprise etched across her face. Ethan realized she was encountering the odd block within him, the same quirk that had confounded telepaths in his past, that intangible gap in his mind that made him oddly resistant to mental intrusion. He'd never understood it fully, nor had doctors. Some called it a birth defect, others a genetic anomaly. Now, he saw how it startled her. He had to think fast. She was reading only half of what she expected, perhaps fueling more anxiety. So, drawing on the comedic instincts he'd relied on in countless bar fights and precarious negotiations, Ethan did something absurd. He began to make silly faces, flapping his lips in a pantomime. He stuck his tongue out, widened his eyes, and even crossed them in a vaudevillian display. In that moment, he must have looked completely mad, but he was aiming for laughter, hoping that even across the alien divide, the universal humor of ridiculousness might bridge the gap. Sera blinked in astonishment, then a soft, melodic sound emerged from her. It was something akin to a giggle, a laugh from a being unaccustomed to such expressions, but it was there nonetheless. And to Ethan's wonder, the glowing shackles seemed to respond, loosening incrementally. The violet glow ebbed, no longer as taut. Emboldened, he continued, performing a silent pantomime of comedic terror, tiptoeing about and pretending to be startled by imaginary foes. He ended with a theatrical tumble, letting out a quiet, whispered, "Ouch," for good measure. Sera laughed again, more audibly this time, though still tinged with apprehension. With each laugh, the bonds softened, their menacing glow receding. Finally, Ethan gently reached toward the shackles, searching for an off-switch or a release mechanism. With one hand, he rummaged in his toolkit, pulling free a device that scanned the energy frequency. He fiddled with the dial, adjusting the wave pattern until, at last, the shackles released with a soft hiss, floating away in motes of dissipating light. Sera sagged, freed from her restraints for the first time in what might have been days or weeks. She gazed at Ethan, a kaleidoscope of emotions swirling in her otherworldly eyes: gratitude, astonishment, lingering fear, and even a trace of mirth. The telepathic presence in Ethan's head felt warmer now, like a delicate breeze instead of a piercing intrusion. Though she could not read him fully, she seemed to sense enough of his intention to trust him. "We need to go," he murmured. She nodded, rising on unsteady legs. Before they could slip away, a klaxon began to wail, red lights bathing the chamber. Evidently, the security system had noticed the energy field's deactivation. In mere moments, the corridor outside would flood with guards and droids. This rescue mission had just become a race against time. Ethan grabbed Sera's hand, guiding her toward a side exit he'd noticed while scanning the schematics. She stumbled, still weak, so he placed one arm around her slender waist to keep her upright. Together, they ducked into a side corridor as the sound of boots and metallic clanks echoed from the main hall. At an intersection, a squad of corporate guards spotted them. "Halt!" one barked, leveling a rifle. Sera trembled, her fear spiking. Immediately, Ethan saw the flicker of violet spark at her wrists, the faint echo of the energy chains effect. Desperate to forestall her panic, Ethan cracked a joke. "Sorry, I'm on my coffee break. Could you come back in 5 minutes?" The absurdity of his quip in the face of lethal weapons startled the guards for a split second, but that was all he needed. Sera, hearing his comedic tone, suppressed her fear. The flare of the chain died away, and Ethan tugged her forward, sprinting around a corner as laser bolts sizzled overhead. They lost the guards temporarily in a tangle of twisting passageways. Every time Sera's panic spiked, Ethan told a quick, nonsensical joke, or made a face, or performed a comedic pratfall. Anything to elicit a tiny laugh and keep the cursed shackles from reasserting themselves. The strategy was ridiculous, but it worked. Eventually, they ducked into an auxiliary hangar. Rows of small drones and scout ships rested inside, many not large enough for extended travel. If they wanted a real chance at escaping, they'd need a fully equipped vessel with a hyperlight engine or at least a well-armored cargo hold. But time was running short. Sera pointed at a mid-sized shuttle that bore Nova Corp's insignia, some sort of patrol craft. Her voice, though soft, conveyed urgency. Ethan nodded, pressing the console to open the hatch. Alarms blared anew, scalding his ears, and the overhead light strobed red, making the walls glow like heated iron. The craft's hatch hissed open, revealing a cockpit only slightly bigger than the standard. Good enough. They clambered inside, sealing the door behind them. Ethan wasted no time, flipping toggles and pressing ignition controls, hoping the ship's system wouldn't require biometric authorization. By some mercy, the engines roared to life. Nova Corp, apparently confident in the security of this restricted hangar, hadn't locked down every vehicle. Fortune, for once, favored Ethan lucky haze. Explosions shook the vessel's hull as the hangar doors parted, letting the vacuum of space in. Automated defense turrets swiveled, firing at the unauthorized craft, but the hull withstood the initial salvo. Ethan cursed, bracing himself, then punched the thrusters. The shuttle lurched forward, slamming him and Sera against their seats as they shot out into the void. A volley of lasers streaked after them, scorching the blackness. The Hyperion's external cannons pivoted, preparing to intercept, but the smaller craft's agility outmatched the dreadnought's massive guns. Zigzagging through the crossfire, Ethan guided the shuttle away from the monstrous warship until it shrank to a glimmering speck behind them. He let out a shuddering breath. They were free, for the moment. Sera looked at him, her eyes glowing faintly, and he sensed relief. She reached out a hand, lightly touching his temple as though to thank him. The telepathic presence in his mind flickered, forming incomplete images, hints of gratitude. Ethan gave a quiet laugh. "Don't mention it," he whispered, glancing at the starfield outside the cockpit. "But we're not out of the woods yet. Nova Corp won't just let us go." He spoke truth. In mere hours, bounty hunters, assassins, and corporate interceptors would be scouring the solar system for them. The stolen data, plus the telepathic alien, plus Ethan's bizarre immunity to telepathy, Nova Corp wanted it all. And they would not hesitate to burn the skies to get it. Their next weeks on the run became a blur of near misses and sudden escapes. They hopped between remote refueling outposts, forging new identities whenever possible. News bulletins and underworld networks buzzed with talk of a rogue telepath and her partner, a man whose DNA carried an ancient experiment known as the Nexus Protocol, a genetic modification rumored to make humans immune to psionic influence. Nova Corp had evidently discovered that Ethan was, in fact, one of the last carriers of that engineered line. They believed that, by extracting his genetic material and merging it with Sera's telepathic powers, they could create an army of hybrid soldiers, beings able to dominate entire star systems. Though frightened, Ethan refused to crumble. He found a friend in Madame Vira, who provided them with safe houses and leads on corporate vulnerabilities. She guided them to a corrupted senator in the Martian parliament, a man named Senator Klein who had grown disillusioned with Nova Corp's arrogance. Through cunning persuasion and carefully leaked information, they convinced Klein to raise questions in Parliament about Nova Corp's secret research. Meanwhile, they cultivated alliances with certain crime syndicates who despised corporate overreach. By spreading rumors of Nova Corp's soon-to-be unstoppable telepathic army, they ignited a frenzy among rival factions. Throughout these perilous maneuvers, Sera's powers continued to grow. Freed from the fear-inducing shackles, she blossomed like a flower in sunlight. Though she struggled to fully read Ethan, she could sense the minds of enemies, gleaning their intentions, guiding Ethan and herself away from ambushes. Whenever the tension escalated, or her fear threatened to resurrect the phantom chains, Ethan would crack a joke, contort his face, or conjure some comedic antic to anchor her. Laughter, it turned out, was a potent force indeed. Don't let it get to your head, she teased him one day through a halting, telepathic message that shaped itself into words in his mind. She'd been practicing forming coherent thoughts he could hear if he allowed it. You might start thinking you're actually funny. Ethan nearly choked on his drink. Hey, I'm a riot, he protested. She simply tilted her head in that charming, alien smirk, sending him a wave of gentle amusement. That, more than anything, had begun to define their bond. A steady undercurrent of camaraderie, forged in the crucible of shared danger and improbable humor. Eventually, their clandestine war reached its climax on Phobos, Mars's largest moon. There, Nova Corp had erected a hidden laboratory, a fortress carved into the rocky surface, shielded by advanced cloaking tech. Rumors said it was the place where Nova Corp conducted its darkest experiments, rumored to be the crucible in which they intended to perfect the Nexus protocol. Ethan and Sera arrived disguised as corporate envoys, using stolen clearance codes and hush-money bribes to slip past the initial security layers. The complex was a warren of tunnels and chambers, each dedicated to a new iteration of unethical science. Monitors displayed swirling DNA helixes, referencing telepathic gene splicing, the next step in the corporation's quest for total psionic dominance. Sera's empathic senses guided them to a large central lab. They crouched behind a set of generator coils while guards marched by. Through the glass partition, Ethan saw rows of stasis tubes containing humanoid figures suspended in luminescent fluid. The sight made him ill. These were test subjects, humans forcibly merged with stolen telepathic genetic codes. Many of them bore signs of mutation, enlarged craniums, twisted limbs, and a wretched expression that spoke of unimaginable torment. Sera's telepathic presence rippled with grief, but also anger. She longed to set them free. Ethan gritted his teeth, scanning the lab for an opportunity. If they could broadcast the truth of this atrocity system-wide, Nova Corp would face universal condemnation. And if they destroyed the research, they might save countless lives from becoming test subjects. Their moment came when a cargo lift bearing fresh supplies rattled to a stop in the corridor. The guards stepped aside to inspect the crates. Spotting their chance, Ethan and Sera slipped into the lab undetected, heading straight for the main console. Sera, though not an expert in Terran technology, had gleaned enough from their weeks on the run to assist. As Ethan tapped frantically at the controls, Sera guided him telepathically to the correct files, identifying what was important. Finally, a progress bar flashed on the screen, uploading data to external network. They had piggybacked on the corrupt senator's private line, ensuring the broadcast would scatter copies of the files across every major node in the solar net. In minutes, the horrifying truth about Nova Corp's secret experiments would be known to governments, media outlets, and criminal syndicates alike. But as the bar crept upward, the door hissed open, revealing a squad of heavily armed security soldiers in black tactical armor. Their rifles glowed with charged plasma, and behind them loomed a tall figure wearing a sleek, menacing uniform. His face was austere, with piercing eyes that seemed to radiate supreme confidence. This, Ethan guessed, was the project's director, or perhaps the entire lab's commandant. Ethan Hayes, the man said coldly, and his little telepathic friend. So, you're the ones interfering with our great enterprise. Ethan drew his sidearm, though he knew the odds were grim. The guards fanned out, weapons ready. He felt Sera tense, picking up the wave of hostility roiling through these men. Fear flickered in her eyes, threatening to conjure the phantom chains once more. Great enterprise? Ethan spat back. I see nothing but torture and madness here. The director sneered. You cannot hope to defeat us. Hand over the telepath, and we might spare you. Sera shook her head. Through Ethan's partial mental barrier, he felt a surge of defiance. She was done being anyone's captive. No more, came her soft but firm telepathic whisper in Ethan's mind. The tension snapped like a drawn bowstring. The guards opened fire. Plasma bolts streaked across the lab. Ethan dove behind a console, yanking Sera down with him, returning fire with shaky aim. One guard cried out as Ethan's shot found an opening in his armor. Another bolt shattered a glass stasis tube, releasing a swirl of greenish fluid and a half-formed telepathic hybrid that tumbled onto the floor with a heartbreaking moan. Sera, her emotions raging, unleashed a pulse of psychic energy that slammed into the soldiers like an invisible wave. Most staggered, dropping to their knees, clutching their helmets as if an unbearable shriek pierced their minds. The director staggered but remained on his feet, protected by some advanced shield. He raised his sidearm and fired a scorching beam that grazed Sera's shoulder. She cried out, collapsing behind the console. Desperate to protect her, Ethan hopped up, firing a volley that forced the director to duck. Then he started talking, fast. He aimed his words at Sera, reciting the most outrageous, comedic tale he could conjure about how he once tried to outrun a Titan ice freighter while wearing clown shoes. It made no sense, but he poured on the silly details, hoping it would draw a laugh from Sera, or at least distract her from the pain. Her lips trembled, and amid the chaos, she released a faint giggle, stifled by pain yet real enough. Ethan felt a surge of relief as the phantom chains that threatened to bind her retreated once again. Then, with renewed resolve, she focused her telepathy on the director's shield. Ethan saw the flicker of violet energy around her eyes, reminiscent of the chains, but now harnessed by her own volition. The shield around the director crackled and failed, leaving him exposed. Ethan fired without hesitation, striking the director in the shoulder. The man howled, tumbling backward. The last of his squad lay incapacitated by Sera's mental assault, and a moment later, the system beeped a triumphant tone. Upload complete. They'd done it. The data was free, out in the open, and the entire lab's secrets were revealed for all to see. Ethan rushed to Sera's side, helping her to stand. She winced, holding her wounded arm, but her eyes still shone with determination. Time to go, he whispered. The lab was in disarray, alarms shrieking, containment tubes bursting, and half-conscious guards moaning on the floor. They sprinted to the corridor. From somewhere in the complex, more reinforcements would be on their way, but the building confusion, plus the catastrophic leak of Nova Corp's secrets, would buy them time to flee. They commandeered a small cargo hovercraft, racing through dusty tunnels that zigzagged beneath Phobos's surface. Eventually, they emerged onto the airfield, where they found the stolen shuttle from earlier locked in a hangar. The auto defense turrets opened fire, but Sera, incensed by the tyranny she'd just witnessed, projected a telepathic burst that briefly scrambled the targeting AI. They made it aboard the shuttle, engines roared to life, and with a thunderous roar, they blasted off into the star-strewn void, leaving Nova Corp's fortress behind in a swirl of alarm klaxons and plumes of lunar dust. Over the following weeks, the galaxy reeled under the weight of the revelations. Evidence of Nova Corp's vile experiments spread like wildfire across every known net node, inciting moral outrage among the general populace. Corporate shareholders deserted in droves. Politicians launched official inquiries. Rival syndicates saw an opportunity to dethrone the once dominant power, further destabilizing Nova Corp's once ironclad influence. For Ethan and Sera, life became both more dangerous and, paradoxically, freer. They were now fugitives, yes, with enormous bounties on their heads, but they were also heroes in the eyes of countless oppressed souls who despised corporate tyranny. Their bond grew closer, tempered by the adversity they'd faced. Sera remained cautious, still adapting to life without chains, but she found in Ethan a strange sense of safety and, yes, laughter. One night, aboard a small freighter they'd borrowed from a sympathetic smuggler, they stood side by side before a wide viewport. The stars glimmered like diamonds scattered over velvet. Sera turned to Ethan, eyes reflecting the cosmic panorama. "You did not have to help me," she said telepathically, shaping the words delicately so he might hear them despite his partial mental barrier. She had grown adept at selecting the simpler route into his mind, respecting his unique mental privacy. "Yet you did, despite the risk. I owe you my freedom." Ethan grinned. Who could resist the chance to meet a real telepathic alien? Plus, you're a good friend. Life is boring if we don't do a little impossible now and then. He paused, gaze drifting to the shimmering stars. What now? We're both wanted across half the galaxy. Her soft laughter tinkled in his mind. Now, we live on. And if Nova Corp tries again, we'll be ready. We both know how to handle them. Ethan's grin widened. With a well-timed joke? Sera nodded, a playful gleam in her eye. Perhaps the galaxy needs more humor, less fear. If that is our mission, I'm willing to face it. They both looked at the flight console, where a half-burned star map projected possible routes. So many worlds lay open before them, some welcoming, others hostile. The horizon of possibilities was vast. A playful sense of adventure sparked in Ethan's chest. He glanced at Sera, reading the same spark mirrored in her expression. "All right, partner," he said, sliding into the pilot's seat. "Let's see where fortune takes us. The best heists, after all, are the ones that come with a punchline." She sat beside him, laying her hand on his arm, feeling the subtle warmth of connection, free from the cold grip of captivity she once knew. Their vessel sailed onward, leaving behind the haunted shadows of corporate oppression and blazing a trail of laughter and unity through the cosmic seas. In that distant corner of the solar system, a new legend took shape, the story of the telepathic alien who found liberation in humor, and the rogue gambler, once overshadowed by questionable luck, who discovered a cause worth fighting for. Together, they formed the most improbable duo, bound by trust, laughter, and a fierce determination to defend the galaxies vulnerable from the clutches of fear. And so, under the twinkling glow of countless stars, they charted their next escapade, free, alive, and ready to face whatever wild, cosmic punchlines the universe had left in store. For in this strange, boundless universe, laughter, it turned out, was the most powerful weapon of all, forging a bond that even energy chains could not shatter. With a smile on the lips of all who dare to hear their tale,